1159. What is Article 1159 all about? Obligation arising from contracts have the force of law between the contracting parties and should be complied with in good faith. Why makita?
Clear, Jean.
Okay, miss. So, ang Article 1159 kay kung law siya about sa kanang mga contracts o kanang about sa contract sa duha ka parties. So, what contract? A contract is a meeting between two persons whereby one binds himself with respect to other to give something or render some service. It is the formal expression by the parties of the rights and obligation they have agreed upon with respect to each other. So ang contract dai siya kay kuan kanang ganing for example kanang nagtayo kag business tapos kuan siya kanang for example nag-invest mo so dapat na contract sila aron na mo'y papilis nga kanang nagmatuod nga partners mo. Mari, palihog ko.
Binding
Mari,
force. Oh, yes. Wait.
Mari.
Wala pa di. Sorry. Binding
Sige,
force.
sige.
Nana.
Oh.
Binding force. Obligation arising from contract are governed primarily by the agreement of the contracting parties. Once perfected, valid contract have the force of law between the parties who are bound to company therewith in good faith, and neither one may without the consent of the other range therefore. So example kanang ako og si Bibi Jean. So ang si Bibi Jean is ay kanang singanan ni kanang wait. Example nagpautang ko ni Bibi Jean pero nangingnan ako siya nga mo agree ba kani with agreement gani. So gingnan ako sa kamaagi ani nga example kanang by 1 week sumubayad jud ka ani kung kuan ka ani nga kuan nga utang. So nga naglibog jud ko. So kanang gingnan ako nga dapat nagsihanay ning duha para naay say para makuan mo nga mosugot ba jud si Bibi Jean nga kani ako kanang nato gi-offer niya ba pero so kailangan dapat kanang nga kuan na mabayad niya kung dili kanang naajud mi documents gani para makuan jud siya with kanang mabaryan jud niya ba. Next.
Ang contract sa kay kanang binding force siya kay kanang for example kanang na may kontrata nga bayaran na karong month pero wala na nga nabayaran sa imong partner so pwede mo sa masiha kay kuan sa kay naman may gipirmahan nga contract nga kana mo na dapat sundon kay ang contract na sa mga rules kung dili nimo matupad ang usa nga rules pwede na ka mapriso ana. Requirements of valid. Sige, ikaw sa.
Requirements of valid contract. As a source of obligation, a contract must be valid and enforceable. So, valid jud siya. Kuan sa contract, so legal ba?
Kuan, ang contracts kay kanang dili siya ma-valid kung dili siya kanang gi-approve sa government. So ang contract dapat kanang gihimo gid siya with legally kanang naay siya abogado ingana dapat kanang makuan sad siya valid sad siya kung kanang wala kana ganing nagsunod siya sa mga good morals ingana anang walay anang valid siya kanang wala gani siya gikuanan nga tao kanang tawag anay wala siya gidaot nga tao ingana tapos valid sad siya kung ang dili siya ma-valid kung ang usa ka parties kay kuan usa ka party kay kanang ignorante gani sa contract kanang wala siya kabalo nga unsa day ang contract unsa day naa sa contract di po na siya ma-valid kung ignorante ang usa. Where contract requires approval by the government. Where a contract is required to be verified and approved by the government before it can take effect, such contract become the law between the contracting parties only when approved, and where there is nothing with it, which is contrary in law and others, its validity must be sustained. So, mo na ni akong giingon ganina nga ang contract kay dili siya kuan valid kung walay approval sa government. Marie.
Compliance in good faith. It means compliance of performance in accordance with the stipulation or terms of the contract or agreement. Good faith and fair dealing must be observed to prevent one party from taking unfair advantage over the other. Evasion by the party of legitimate obligation after receiving the benefits under the contract will constitute unjust enrichment on his part.
So kuan na siya guys kanang compliance and good faith. So nag-contract mo. So dapat nasad kay salig sa imong kakontrata nga dili siya kanang talagang iyang nakaisalig nga sundon niya ang unsay nakabutang sa contract aron makuan gani ma-prevent ang kanang unfair advantage para kanang dapat sad makabalo mo ba nga kana siya masaligan kana siya kana mo follow gyud na siya sa contract. Liability for breach of contract. Although a contract imposes no penalty for its violation, a party cannot breach it with impunity. So, ang contract kay wala na siya penalty kung na sa violation pero dili sad ka kuan ana kung dili sad ka dalay-dali og kanang kuan sa contract kanang balik gani.
Reservation of interest of promise. A breach upon a contract confess upon the injured party a valid cause for recovering that which may have been loss of suffered.
So, preservation of interest of promisee. So, kuan na siya ang contract kay for example na kuan na wala na tuman ang role so kuan nagi ang usa nga party nga wala katuman sa role kay nagi na siya consequences nga kuanon kanang makuan kung dili niya ma-follow ang role para to
Okay, thank you so much, Baby Jean, and the other isang reporter, si iPhone naman ko nakagawa sa iya ha. I cannot see her. Okay. So, by the way, before we end, before I will give the additional discussion about this article, you may have the chance to ask your classmates about what you have reported to see if they're really listening, and your classmates can also have a chance to ask you Wala sila kasabot. Okay? Nya mag-mute lang ta kay dili ta ma-disturb. Okay. So, kisa may una mong mangutana, ang imong classmates to the reporter or reporter to the classmate? O sige. Go ahead. Because that will be recorded as your oral still. Okay, so Article 1159 is an obligation arising from contracts, no? So of course, we already have discussed last time that when we say contract, there must be two parties or beyond, or more than two, di ba? So of course, we were talking about the requisite of a civil obligation, which has a juridical necessity. There are four, right? So that we have the obligor, the obligee, the subject matter, at the same time the law, no, that is binding between the two parties, right? So I hope that you understand that, and I hope that you have watched the video para masabtan ninyo. So karon, since we have skipped article, unsa man itong gi-skip, no? Kay wala man sila dire. Ug dili sila ka-report ron zero na dayon niya, ako na mo report. Ana ra? Ako na mo discuss ato kung wala na zero na kay kaduha naman, instead nga Monday mag-report kay ningon sila Monday, wala last week, wala man daw niya, wala naman sa drone nga Tuesday naman ta. So wala na to, no, cancel na to tanan before 1159 na report. Depende nila unsaon nila pag-appeal. They have to appeal. Unsaon nila pag-report dire nga wala naman sila nitunga. Okay? So, yun ko sayon ra kayo maghimo rag PowerPoint or unsa video ba diha, then start na wala man gyud. So, okay mahimo ana. So karon, when we talk about Article 1159, obligations arising from contracts have the force of law between the contracting parties and should be complied with in good faith. So that's the only topic of the Article 1159. So what are the obligations arising from the two parties or the parties making the contract? That's all. That is all you need to understand. No, ayaw na kayo og ikatag pa yung utok. So of course, we are talking about the word contract. First, you need to understand what is contract. Okay, so reporters, can you tell me what is contract?
Ang contract miss kay kana ay dok kay kanang nag-involve siya og duha ka tawo kung mura siya kanang agreement yani nga kana siya kanang for example kana siya dapat pares sa kana mga OFW gani miss ay dok di ba naa man na siya contract gyud nga kanang a year maura na imong year nga sa pagtrabaho niya og malapas ka na di na kuan na sad pwede na sad ka dili na sad ka kakuan kung malapas ka na nga contract og and di sad ka kuan kung bad influence sad ka kung dili nimo mahuman ang
So thank you, Baby Jean. So please take note of this. No, if you have notebooks and pens there, please take note. So a contract is simply a meeting of minds between two or more persons. Again, a contract is simply a meeting of minds between two or more persons whereby one binds himself with respect to the other to give something or to render some service. That's contract. Okay, I will repeat. So a contract is a meeting of two minds between two or more person whereby one binds himself with respect to the other, comma, to give something or to render service. That's the meaning of contract. Okay. So, we were talking about binding force, no? So, unsa man ang binding force diha ang dapita nga kontrata. So, ang nakapakusgan anang kontrata is because of the binding force. So, anybody who have understood the report of Baby Jean, kay murag gi-show to ganiha ang meaning sa binding force. Unsa man ning binding force? Anybody can answer. Okay, so when we talk about binding force, no, kay again, naay kontrata. So I hope makasabot mo ha, naay contract. So ang kontrata kasabutan sa duha or more than 2 person. Unya kana nga contract na ay binding force. So unsa man nga binding force, no? So an obligation, kanang obligation arising from the contract, mao na siya ang binding force. Okay? So kung iyong gitag obligation arising from the contract ug unsay obligation dapat nga buhaton sa 2 parties. So if that obligation will be breached, no? So dili ma-follow between the any of or either of the party. So that's why they have already what? Tulubagon sa balaod, no? So I hope you get the point. So again, please guys, no, please mute your microphone para madali ta kay hapit na ra bang oras. So when we talk about binding force, it is an obligation arising from contracts, which is the law, no, or force of law between the contracting parties. Again, obligation arising from contracts, whereby obligation arising from contracts and has a force of law between the contracting parties. Okay. So example, they have the same binding effect of obligations imposed by laws. So when we talk about contract, both parties have the same obligation, no? Katong ingon ni Jean ganina nga sa government, pasabot niya ato nga dapat ang nasa contract dili Maring, palihog tag mute day. Kung magklase ganit tanong ya, di mo maminaw, di mo kasabot. Bantay bito to yung ansiranan. Sayon kay tong ansiranan nas Google Classroom ha, bantay na di makakuha ato. Okay, again, og mingon tag kontrata, there has to be 2 or more person. Unya kana nga contract has a binding force. So kanang binding force mo na gitawag og force of law between the contracting parties. It means to say that if one of the parties breach the contract, it means to say did not follow the obligation, it means to say naa siya'y tulubagon. Okay, I hope you get the point. Now, what is a requirement of a valid contract? No, kay Baby Jean ganiha mention about when is a contract valid. Anybody?
Ako, Doc.
Sige, Lausa.
The contract must be valid and enforceable.
Yeah. I know the contract must be valid and enforceable. But when it is, or what is the requirement of that valid contract? When can we say that it is valid?
Hinubaga, Doc.
Ako, Doc.
Hinubaga, Doc.
Sige, hinubaga. Okay, go ahead.
The contract will be valid when it is approved, when the government will be approved.
Okay, based na sa report ni Baby Jean ha. Pero there is misconception sa gisulti ni Baby Jean ganiha akong ikuan later on. No, so there is misconception. Ang yang sabot sa approved by the government, it means to say na ang kontrata dapat ang stipulations dito naara sa law, dili biyan sa law sa government. Muna pasabot niya, no? So anyway, the government has nothing to do with the contract of the private individuals, guys. No, so walay kalibutan ang government anang private individuals nga contract, but it should be ang pasabot ni Baby Jean ato nga ang ilang kontrata ang naka-stipulate silang kontrata wala mo supak sa pamalaod sa Pilipinas. Muna pasabot. So any answer kinsa to sige niha aside from hinubaga?
Ako, Doc.
Sige day katigbe Marife.
It must the contract will be valid if the 2 parties both agreed with the contract they've discussed. Mga to, Doc.
Sige day, you have the idea. Very good. No, kay naminaw jud kas report nilang Baby Jean. Okay, so please take note if you have their pens and paper. A contract is valid if it is not contrary to law. Oh, di ba? So a contract is valid if it is not contrary to law. It means to say wala siya musupak, no? Tapos morals, good customs, public order, and public policy. So muna siya. Kung balido lang na siya, basta kay wala siya ni supak sa law, morals, good customs, public order, and public policy. So when can we say that it is invalid?
Doc,
Drama.
dili na siya mabalid Doc if wala na subay sa law.
Very
Wala
good.
na
No, the opposite. The opposite of what I have just said, no? So it is not if it is not contrary to law, morals, good customs, public order, and public policy. Okay, very good. So nakakita na mo gamay sa nakasabot na mo gamay sa article 1159. Akong balikod ang 1159. Obligations arising from contracts have the force of law between the contracting parties and should be complied with in good faith. Okay? So you already understand what is contract. So kung yung tag-contract, there are two parties or more than two parties within it. And there must be a force of law binding it. And gitawag na siya binding force. Okay? The force of law binding it is called the binding force. And requirement for that contract to be valid, it should be contrary to law, morals, good customs, and public order. It is not valid if it is the opposite, no? Meaning to say, kanang wala siya ni nganong di man sila mag-mute oy Ginoo kon Diyos ko. Okay. So, when you get in, guys, tanawa din ang microphone kung naka-mute ba, no? Okay, base naghigda pa mo diha. Okay. So, that's it. So, you already know what is the meaning of contract. You already know what is the meaning of binding force. It means to say the force of law within that contract. It means to say na if one of the parties did not follow what is stipulated in the contract, so there is obligation comes in. Okay? So kung obligation na gani, masabtan na nimo nga naa na kay what? Civil obligation, no, to the other party. So ang requirement niya, that should be what? Contrary to law, morals, good customs, and public order. It is invalid kung dili na siya contrary sa law. Now, let's talk about breach of contract. When can we say that there is breach of contract? Anybody?
Doc,
Tihoy?
so when we talk about a breach of contract, it takes place when a party fails or refuses to comply without legal reason or justification with his obligation under the contract as promised.
Very good. So a contract may be breached if or violated. So there are two terms here that you need to understand. When we talk about breach, it means to say violation. So there is a breach of contract or violation of contract because sometimes, guys, we just understood or heard about the word breach. What kasabot? Unsa man ang breach of contract? Well, we know that the meaning is siguro na dyan ay negative diha kay breach of contract man, but the other word or synonymous term of the word breach is violation. It means to say one violated on what is stipulated in the contract. Meaning to say, na ay wala ni tuman sa kung unsay gi-stipulate sa contract. Okay, again, kung na ay breach of contract, it means to say obligation comes in. Okay? So, you're right, Kihoy, very good. Very good. That a contract may be breached or violated by a party in whole or in part. No? So, a breach of contract takes place when a party fails or refuses to comply without legal reason or justification with his obligation under the contract as promised. Okay, so that is what we call as breach of contract. Now, you need to understand compliance of good faith because it is stated there in the Article 115 itself. Again, I'll repeat, Article 115 states that obligations arising from contracts have the force of law between the contracting parties and should be complied with in good faith. So what does it mean when we talk about good faith?
Doc,
Lorenzana.
compliance in good faith means compliance or performance in accordance with the stipulation or terms of the contract or agreement. Sincerity and honesty must be observed to prevent one party from taking unfair advantage over the others.
Okay, so very good. Compliance in good faith, meaning to say, what is stipulated in the contract, you're to follow because that is what you have agreed upon, right? So that's compliance in good faith. What if there is, when can we say that there is non-compliance? So, ano sa mga makaingon nga there is non-compliance? Anybody?
Doc.
Kihoy again.
So when there is a non-compliance by a party, a non-compliance in good faith by a party with his legitimate obligations after receiving the benefits of a contract would constitute unjust enrichment on his part. That's all, Doc.
Okay. So that's it, no? So non-compliance by a party with its legitimate obligation after receiving the benefits of a contract would constitute unjust enrichment on his part. So although a contract provides no penalty for its violation, a party cannot breach it with impunity. So simply ra good guys, no? Non-compliance of the contract is, for example, one party already received the benefits for his part, no niya. Pagkahuman ana, wala na dayon siya ni follow kung unsa pay laing gi-stipulate sa contract. So there is non-compliance. Still there is obligation. Okay? So that is all about Article 1159. That's very short, no? So anybody who can give me the summary or synthesis of this article before we leave?
Doc.
Sige, Kihoy and murag take away learning ni siya. So anybody could answer. Sige, Kihoy, go ahead.
Article 1159 is the obligations arising from contracts have the force of law between the contracting parties and should be complied with in good faith. When we say contract, it is a meeting of minds between two persons whereby one binds himself with respect to the other to give something or to render some service. So there are three, which is the binding force, the requirement of a valid contract, and a breach of contract. That's all. Thank you. That's all, Doc.
Okay, so thank you, Kihoy. And sige, and any other student can answer still. Unsa rin nasabtan ninyo ay kabalaka way mapriso dire. What do you understand about Article 1159? Lain sa kay mulakaw na ta dire nya wala tay nasabtan, no? Can I call Revelieza Rillian? Na ino na dayon ko walay signal, Dok. Ikay ko kaklaro. Alkansi kita ani. Milka May Cuaves. Do you want to say something about Article 1159?
So, ang nasabtan, Doc, is dapat ang contracts kay mo kuan sa law kanang wala siya dapat kanang
Violate.
I-violate, Doc. So everything nga dapat tanan kay kuan sa law jud tanan, Doc.
Okay. So what do you understand about Article 1159, Dai? Milka? So what is Article 1159 all about?
Honestly, look, naawit kog do kay dugay man ko matug do kay naami tinda ba pang gabi
Okay. So this is recorded, no? So you can check your Google Classroom. Okay, so can I call anyone? So can I call Eileen Burgos? What is Article 1159 all about?
Karon pa ko nakasud, Dok, kay nanghuam kong cellphone ba para makasud ko jud ko sa Zoom kay di man kasud akong cellphone.
Sige, okay. So can I call in Barcelo Imari? How about Tanyeza Melanie?
Miss, Doc.
Yes, Doc.
Sige, go ahead, Tanyeza.
Article 1159, it is all about obligation arising from contracts, have the force of law between the contracting parties and should be complied with in a good faith. Under the Article 1159 is the first contractual obligation, the second compliance in a good faith, and the third is contrast. And the meaning of contractual obligation is the obligation arising from contracts or voluntary agreements, and the second is compliance in a good faith. Compliance or performance in accordance with the stipulation or terms of contracts or agreements. And the last contrast is a contrast is a meaning of mind between two persons whereby one bind himself with respect to the others. Excuse me. Moradok.
Thank you, Dai, Melanie. Okay. So, kanara good. Very easy to understand. O sige, Barcelo. Dai, you were unmuting ganiha. Sige.
Here with me, Doc.
Dai, go ahead.
Article 1159 all about is obligation arising from contract have the force of law between the contracting parties and should be complied with in good faith. So, kuan kanang is a meeting of two minds. Contract is a meeting of two minds parties. One binds himself respect to others. Nora Doc.
Sige. Akong klarohon ha kay para kailangan ba ning balaod guys if you are going to like naamoy ma-omit nga word lahi na siyag meaning. So I need to repeat, no? So when we talk about Article 1159 kato para sa mga in the for the benefit of those who are late, Article 1159 is the obligations arising from contracts have the force of law between the contracting parties and should be complied with in good faith. So akong bisayo na siya, ug naay kontrata, it means to say na naay duha ka party or more than two parties nga naa sa contract, nga nagmugna sa contract, okay, two parties. So kung usaray, example, ako ray nagmugna, nagbuhat kog contract sa akong kagalingon, dili na contract. Kaya ako ra bang usa. Do you get me? So, mayong contract, naagyo dili magkuan gyud oy, mag-mute. Kuan disturb ang ato ang discussion diri. Okay, so mayong kay taog contract guys, duha gina siya involved, two persons or more than two persons involved. Unya, ang Article 1159 states that kung naaga ni contract, there must be binding force or kanang binding force, gitawag na siya force of law. Nga kung wala, kung nang usa ka party, dili katuman sa kung unsay gistipulate sa contract, so there comes the obligation. So na siya obligasyon kung di siya katuman sa contract. Now, therefore, parang walay obligation nga mo comes in, dapat it will be complied with in good faith. So mingon kay ka good faith, dili na good faith nga kanang buutan ka. Mingon kita good faith dinhi nga Article 1159 ang pasabutan na nga ang pag-follow ra gyud or non-violating what is stipulated in the contract. Maura, simple ra kayo ng Article 1159 na ay kontrata. So sa kay naa may kontrata, kamong duha ka party or kinsa may involved ana nga kontrata, na ay force of law or binding force ana. So kung naay kay naa may binding force, so naay tulubagon ang usa ka party nga dili mutuman sa kung unsay gistipulate sa contract. Now, parang walay obligation or walay non-violation of what is stipulated in the contract, you both should comply it with good faith. Oh, kinsa may nakasabot? Uy, nakasabot?
Yes, Doc.
Yes, Doc.
Mag-uol man sa daan, di mo kasabot na pwede na itong napagaw-pagaw ng tagstorya dire. So there are different terms that you need to understand. First, the meaning of contract. Second, the word binding force. Next is a requirement of the valid contract. And next is the compliance in good faith. So muna dapat niyo sabton. Contract, nakasabot naman mo ng contract. Number 2, binding force. This is the force of law. Next is the, ano tawag ani, kanang requirement of a valid contract. Unsa ganito? The requirement of a valid contract is that the contract must be in contrary of
The law.
Law.
yes,
Law.
law, unsa pa?
Morals.
Morals, unsa pa?
Good custom,
Customs.
public order, and public policy.
Policy o dapat na siya ana. So katong pasabot ni Baby Jean ganiha nga dapat approve sa government. The word approve should not be used ha kay kung yung kag approve therefore nagsubmit day kag papel dito sa asa ka ni submit kung na kay contract. No. Ang contract kamo duha ra jud ana naghimo anang kontrata then inyong gipa-notify or notaryuhan sa attorney, di ba? To make it valid, unya aron mabasa po sa attorney nga ay dili ni siya mo contrary, di ni siya mo kontra sa law o sa public order o morals or good customs ana, di ba? So example lang bitaganta mo example. Example na ako'y massage pa sa Sibonga. So dapat na ako'y contract between my unsay tawag ani, my example kay corporation na siya sa akong mga igsuon, dapat na anay kontrata na mong mga igsuon, no? Unya ka nga kontrata, dapat ako nang panotaryuhan, example. Now, igbasa sa attorney ana nga ang ako ang business kay massage para unya naay day pwede nga mo sa tawag ana kana other service nga pwede day siya ang akong masahista kay pwede dadon sa akong kliyente sa ilang balay kay for extra service.
Extra service.
O so dili na siya contrary sa law kay og morals og public order kay pwede naman day siya kuan-kuanon didto naaman siya like samot magyud og ang akong spa napad jud ko laing room nga pwede sila didto mag-extra service. So that is beyond the contract already. So kung beyond the contract, so na ko'y ang binding force din ha, ako wala na ko ni breach na ko sa contract. It means to say I violated the contract, and because I violated the contract, I might face what penalty, no? So do you get the point, students?
Yes, Doc.
Yes,
Oh,
Doc.
I hope na nakasabot in taon mo kay bisag usara ni ka article diri kay wala man tong ubang articles. Okay. Class Biddle, kamo na ipangita og paagi na unsa to sila doon sa ilang rason nga wala sila nitunga diri kay dili na pwede nga mag-report ta unya wala sila diri. So guys, next article nga atong i-tackle is article 1159. Unya, straight na siya. It means to say guys na ready lang yun. Kaya nagtawag na ko wala ka zero na. Do you get me?
Yes, Doc.
Sige.
Yes, Doc.
Yes,
Sige,
Doc.
sige na. Let's end the meeting and thank you so much for attending the class, guys. And please look at your Google Classroom and please answer the quiz assignment. That will be all for today and thank you so much.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, Sad kayo, Doc.
Bye. Thank you.